Hello, and thank you for stopping by to watch this video. I titled this video, I usually love it when I'm right, because I'm looking back at predictions I made a week ago and trying to see if I'm right or was right, and using that as a way of gauging whether the approach I've been taking statistically is really providing useful insight into the future. So this is the presentation I posted a week ago. The slides are right here. In miniature thumbnail, and I have this is the file tag that says the last date it was modified was the 21st. That's to show you I haven't gone back and monkeyed with the file and make it look better than it did. For example, it's actually the file I presented. I wanted to remind everyone that I have been teaching at universities for about 30 years, so as an academic I love being right. Probably the two things academics like most are talking and being right. But in this case, being right has a pretty significant burden in terms of the implications. So last week at this time, many of us were starting to get shelter-in-place orders. The Olympics had not yet been canceled, but would be canceled shortly thereafter. There were predictions that in the next year, half of all hotels will close. And there was an article about Trump blaming the Chinese for this and still referring to this coronavirus or the COVID-19 disease as the Wuhan flu or the China flu or something. He's, of course, changed his tune now about that, but we'll leave that where it is. This is the situation report that was available on the 20th, so this was the 19th when the World Health Organization was collecting its data and putting it out on the 20th. At the time, Europe had about 80,000 cases, almost 90,000. And the region of the Americas, which includes US and Canada, had 9,144 cases, so much, much smaller. I then pulled some of the Johns Hopkins dashboard images that I've been taking every day. Well, if we're being honest with each other, I take images probably 4 or 6 times a day. But in any case, I have images from the 13th, the 17th, and 20th of March, so that spans a week. I showed in the presentation that we had increased by 121,000 new cases total worldwide. One way of making a prediction of the future is to assume that we would increase again by another 121,000 new cases, and that would lead to something like 379,000 cases for this current weekend for today. And then I went through a really big deal out of saying, nope, that's the wrong mindset. Epidemics are exponential, they're multiplicative. What you need to do is look at the ratio of 258 over 137, and you get 88% additional growth, and then you use that percentage growth as your engine for prediction, and that would lead us to predict something closer to 500,000 cases for this weekend. This was last weekend at the time. I also talked about the fact that the apparent or the observable case fatality ratio at that point was 4 to 6%. And so if you take 5% of 500,000 cases, you get 25,000 deaths. So I predicted there'd be about 25,000 deaths. Just as a sort of a side point, the case fatality ratio for seasonal influenza is usually 0.1% or lower. So we're talking about something that's probably 50 times more deadly than the seasonal influenza, and it's also quite a bit more contagious and is spread much faster. So if someone tells you this is just a flu, just punch him for me right in the face. It just makes me crazy because it's just so much more. Okay, so this is the predictions I made last week. This slide I did change. The little gold box around next weekend is there now. It didn't used to be. I said we'd pass 500,000 cases with 40,000 being added every day. I said we would pass 25,000 cumulative fatalities, and we would get 2,000 more each day. I said the United States would be the second epicenter of the pandemic, and that we'd be approaching 200,000 cases. So those are my exciting predictions. These are the images from the Johns Hopkins dashboard yesterday and today. They're not quite 24 hours apart, so I've made sure that my calculations are based on a 24-hour comparison. In any case, we did pass 500,000, and not only did we do that, we did it yesterday. We're not adding 40,000 cases a day. We're adding 55,000 cases in a 24-hour period, and that rate's accelerating like everything else about this pandemic will for the next while. So I call that a B plus. When we move on to case fatalities, I said they would cross the 25,000 threshold this weekend. They just did that, so I was pretty much spot on for that. But I thought we would be growing at about 2,000 fatalities a day at that point. And actually the rate, I'm sorry to say, is closer to 3,000 deaths every 24 hours right now. So as with cases, they're accelerating at a rate faster than I had predicted they would be a week ago. And I said the United States would become a second epicenter, and I think that's fairly obvious to all of us, but just as a sort of way of reinforcing how much this has changed, this is an article piece from the New York Times this evening. They say as of Friday evening, at least 101,000 people across every state, D.C., and territories have been confirmed positive for the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. And we've had 1,600 patients at least die. So we're very close to 2,000 fatalities. The thing I thought was really interesting about this article is they pointed out that a month ago, things looked vastly different. At the start of March, so that's just 1 month we're talking about, there were 70 cases that had been confirmed, most of which had been related to overseas travel and direct contact with someone known to have had the virus, as opposed to the sort of massive community spread we're getting right now. So in 1 month, the entire world has changed, remarkably so. So what was my final prediction? That we would have 200,000 cases this weekend. This one looks like I over-predicted instead of under-predicted, but you'll notice that the U.S. In a 24-hour period is adding about 20,000 cases, and it's accelerating. So I would guess we're going to add 25 or 30,000 in the next 24 hours, and maybe 30, 35 in the 24 hours beyond that. So probably Monday we're going to hit 200,000 cases, although the number of cases we hit is problematic because it's limited by our testing, which is dreadful still. So, I mean, if you had to ask me how many cases truly exist, I'm sure it's over 200,000, but we're modeling the confirmed cases. Interesting article came out of University of Washington where they're actually modeling fatalities and arguing that they're much better to model this epidemic because they're not influenced by issues of testing effort and different decisions different regions make about whether they test people that they suspect have it or test everyone, or if they have the capacity to that. So maybe I'll talk about that some more tomorrow because it's actually a pretty fascinating idea. Of course, fatalities are usually about 2 weeks behind the cases in terms of the timeline, maybe even 3, depending on how long the disease sort of tends to develop in people. So getting back to my my qualifications and who I am when I started this channel, I think a week ago. That's my resting nerd face, so I think that's kind of funny. I've been teaching biostatistics for a long time. I think this approach of using the recent data, usually I'm using the last week's worth of data and fitting models to that and predicting 1 week in advance, has ended up being, I think, fairly accurate and helpful. So I hope you find the information is useful, and it, certainly for me, I will continue analyzing the data on a daily basis. It's just really important to me, and it's how I deal with the stresses, to try to figure out exactly what's going on to the nearest, decimal point. It doesn't change anything, but it's the way I do it. So I hope you find them useful.